Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Vault podcast, where we explore how technology, AI, and cybersecurity are reshaping how organizations operate and compete. Today's guest sits right at the intersection of AI automation, enterprise transformation, and real world operational scale. Mark has spent years leading automation and analytics programs inside large global organizations from Nextera Energy to Capgemini, Cognizant, and now Carrier. What makes Mark interesting is he's not just talking about AI from a strategy deck. He's actually implementing it in environments where systems are complex, legacy tech is everywhere, and the stakes are honestly real. So, Mark Ritcey, welcome to the Vault, and glad to have you on here.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be here.
Awesome. Before we jump into some of these hot topics, I'd love if you give some of the audience a little bit of context. So you worked across energy consulting now in a lot of enterprise or operations. So what pulled you into this world? What pulled you into automation and analytics?
Well, I must say that I've had a long technology career, so 25 years or so, and really, I had started on the technical side, started managing large programs and working with enterprise software and applications such as SAP. And so it was around 2016, 2017 that I was with a very large energy provider that I think many people may know, which is NextEra Energy. And so they identified robotic process automation back then. And I think it was a bit early within the RPA solution space. And so a lot of companies hadn't quite adopted it yet. And so it was early on. And well, I wanted to do something different instead of managing large ERP programs and implementations. So I said, I'm going to start building software robots. And I thought it was just really super interesting is that now we have automation. We are going to build virtual users of applications. And so it just seemed really super exciting, right? To deliver a
Yeah.
new capability and technology within that space. So
Awesome. And look, I mean, you're talking about like timelines of adoption, early for implementation or not. What was this moment of the realization where you thought, okay, we need to do this. This is the shift, and we need to get here now, right?
well, yeah, it was certainly a much different approach. And we had legacy automation capabilities for years, for decades, right? And for those of us that work in technology is that we're familiar with some of these solutions, batch programs and automatic report generation. But this was a new type of solution using RPA that could work with applications, legacy systems, pull data from them. And also, we could start to scale these solutions, right? And so it wasn't one user doing a set of manual tasks, but it could virtually be dozens of users or hundreds of users, right? Really doing this at scale. And so looking at that, we have automation, removing or removing manual tasks through automation and really delivering new capabilities was rather a no-brainer for us and for Nextera. And so we thought this could really be new type of solutions that could then help our business.
I love it. And you've Mark worked across consulting and enterprise. What's the biggest difference designing automation versus actually operating it at scale?
Well, yes, I would say there's a couple differences there. And each one of those, they deserve a different level of attention. And so, in terms of designing that with automation, and that can be legacy RPA, or now we have new technologies within the past 2 years. We have Gen AI since 2023, late 2022, and now we've had machine learning around for quite some time. And so, that is, for one, the designing of those different automation capabilities and what goes into that. And you can have sound design practices, everything from handling functional requirements to AI security. But now we also need to operate and maintain these solutions. And so that is a different level of effort. And so it involves, for one, security by design. Second, the identification of key performance indicators and metrics to monitor and measure these types of solutions, and then to incorporate that is part of the feedback loop back into design.
Makes sense. So it's a constant loop, basically. You're always
Yeah.
you're always making things better. That's design.
y-
You're always acting and taking out a
Yeah.
lot of the manual tasks, right?
Yes, yes. And
So
for our DevOps colleagues, right? And for our other technology managers, people can probably tell what I'm referring to. And so it's the DevOps concept, right? DevSecOps, but now we have ML ops and also LLM ops. And so that is what I'm inferring here as part of that overall feedback loop and so on.
I love it. And look, we talk about some of these things, assuming. I mean, look, in our day to day, I know what you're talking about. You're doing it in, day out. You're seeing the adoption as well. It's obviously keeping you busy. Same for me. What I'm seeing, in more often than not, is that most companies are still struggling with basic automation, right?
Yep.
It's
Yep.
like, do you have a workflow in place? Seems to
Yeah.
be the conversation a lot of times. You're either way ahead or way behind, like with data pipelines, system integration, looking for some perspective inside some large organizations. I guess, what do executives get wrong about AI adoption today?
Yes, I would say first off that we have new tools and capabilities here. And what I have seen within my consulting experience, because I'm with a specific AI consulting firm now called Bridge, which we focus in the financial services area. But what I've seen really across some companies, organizations, is that with these new tools and capabilities, there is an interest and an appetite to experiment, right? What we can build. But there is a disconnect between what we can build and the type of proof of concepts that we can stand up and the connection to business value. In other words, there's experimentation, getting to know the tools almost for experimentation's sake, or actually building valid proof of concepts and solutions that could then be deployed across the enterprise for real business value and also the connection to business goals and objectives.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And so starting high, always connecting to really the imperatives of the organization, that's absolutely critical. In this world where everybody seems to be, experimenting as well, what are the first automation wins that actually move the needle, right? And show some productivity or ROI and really bring a larger organization to that level where they starting to think this is real, this is realized gains, and here's where we could call, chalk up a win.
Yes, I would say there are many, many use cases, and they differ by industry, they differ by industry goals and objectives. And so, what I would recommend on the use cases that are really going to move the needle or necessarily get started from the beginning is that it's particularly suggested to look at opportunities that are aligned with your business objectives, and they can be very right. They can be, we're going to acquire a new company, we need to better segment or classify these customers, or we need to sell these different types of products. But generally speaking, without being industry and necessarily very specific on that use case, is that it's the primary recommendation to look for those opportunities, whether that be in marketing to create segmentation across your customers and likely buyers and generate marketing content to plan campaigns using a Gen AI tool, or another use case in prediction, right? Predicting customer revenue and so on. Look for those opportunities that are of low to medium value, probably medium value, and also are of low to medium complexity. Is because if you get too complex at the beginning, if it is really a super high value use case, there's probably going to be some connection to complexity there. And it's just too much to take on. It's too much of a large use case or set of use cases to get started from the beginning.
Yeah, so you got to build a foundation underground before you start building up or even have a floor, right? So if that's not set, then it's going to be very challenging to essentially have a structure that's held up with integrity, I guess.
Yes, yes, certainly.
And in these critical infrastructure, industries that you're in with Nextera, energy, industrial, you're deep into finance and these
Hmm.
these kind of high availability environments, right? You need to have the critical infrastructure up and running, and you can't have a hiccup, otherwise that costs a lot of money, right?
Right,
So
right.
that's very different from a startup environment where you can bob, weave, flex, experiment a little bit, at the expense of potentially a lost time or revenue, not in these critical areas. So I guess, very high level, how is it different with critical infrastructure versus in a startup world, right? Looking at your automation capabilities.
Yes. So I think that's a great point. And you always need to balance governance and risk with speed to market. And so that speed to market is important for a large enterprise and is absolutely crucial for the smaller companies and startups. But I would say that when you're looking to build those quick win, easy solutions to meet the needs of your customers is that you must particularly do some sort of evaluation and risk awareness as far as what your risk tolerance is. And so, what I mean by that is, so let's say that you're a smaller company and you are a startup. And so you want to build a quick solution. And so, what is the risk of that solution? How is that solution? Where is it going to be exposed? What is the endpoint? Who are the users? What is the data of the application? And so those are all risk parameters that you must consider. And then the minimal acceptable risk framework that you may have. So, in other words, if you are a small company, you're going to build a AI and automation solution. That's fine. But then what is your data? Do you have NPI data? Do you have PII data? Are you dealing with social security numbers, credit card numbers? And I think everyone can see that that type of data and information and who is going to use the particular solution, if it's customers facing, is absolutely paramount, that you must have some sort of minimum safeguards and some minimum level of risk tolerance for the quick deployment and build and offering of your solution.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, makes perfect sense. And I guess that what we grapple with and what we're seeing more often than not, in that speed to market category is how do we do it without getting burnt? People are standing on the sideline waiting to see what comes out every week as a new, release of I don't know how many tools and productivity things.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
saw you saw last
yeah,
week, last 2 weeks actually. I think I've seen something every single day or every other day that either Anthropic
yeah.
or Google comes out with, right? How do you manage this environment? I mean, how do you ground these executives in this environment?
Yes. And so I think that is a very relevant question, right? That we have tool or solution proliferation today, right? It's always some new capability, which is exciting, which is good, but there's a downside to that, right? As you're alluding to. So the way that I would look at this, it's also a technical debt question, right? And so for us, we're technology professionals, and so we know that with technical debt, that is not the optimal way to deliver the solution, right? It was built to design one way, but there is another or newer approach. And so I think looking at these newer types of technologies, that any new solution can make sense. Although we do know that new is not always better. But I would say it's a technical debt question is because it must be connected to the business impact and value. What is the value of implementing that new type of solution, that new model, or that new upgrade? And I think second is that we also know as tech professionals is that this could have a real impact on our current operations, is because we're very familiar with regression issues. And so just because we are working with a LLM model that was upgraded from 4 to 5, looking at one of the leaders in the field, that can mean that using that model with our existing solution, we could experience performance degradation there. And we must test and validate that we see no decline in performance, in accuracy, in relevancy, and so forth. And so the connection with new solutions, looking at as new technical debt, and doing an evaluation of the business impact and value, I think is the way to approach these new types of technologies.
Absolutely. Yeah. So getting real, I mean, getting practical, is this going to help? Right. And how?
Yes.
Let's define it. Let's get
Yes.
the basics down.
Yeah.
I love that. And Mark, you talk about governance, right? And AI
Hmm.
governance. At Vault, I mean, we say brand gets you the meeting and process wins the deal from a demand gen perspective, right? But once they have a system in place, I mean, what does governance look like when mistakes are unacceptable in these critical environments?
Yeah. So I would say governance, and you can look at governance in a couple different ways. And so, for one, you can have program governance, which is oversight by your key stakeholders, including business leadership, technology leadership, legal involvement, compliance involvement. And then, second, another level of governance, which is execution and delivery. And then third is that how are you going to support and monitor those solutions? And so for execution and design and delivery is that you must be building any sorts of AI solution according to best practices, right? And you can look at security or requirements definition, non-functional requirements definition, and then third, that the enabling of proactive monitoring as possible. And so to your point, we're not going to accept these critical failures. And so, to mitigate some of those critical failures, we could be working with an AI model that data drift. Our data is always going to change. Our customer data is going to change. We might have market available data, customer preferences, weather, etc. But to have some sort of monitoring to catch those core issues, to your point, and then the best way to mitigate or to set those plans and approach to mitigate those issues.
Yep. I love it. And so, I mean, in that approach, you're really balancing that, forward thinking, fast adoption, innovation, but grounding in reliability, safety, and a practical approach. So,
Absolutely.
well said. So let's get a bit more practical in the automation stack, right?
Mhm.
So when they start building these programs, often execs think the tools will solve everything. But right, what does a modern enterprise like actually look like with an automation stack? What does that look like to you?
Well, so it can vary, right? One of my former managers that he often told me I would ask him a question and he would say, it depends, right? So that was a lesson that I took away. So it does depend upon what the organizational goals are and capabilities are, right? And so there can be a goal that, yes, we want to provide a chatbot to provide restaurant recommendations for our hotel customers, right? But then we have different capabilities in house, is that perhaps we are a hotel chain, small hotel chain. We don't necessarily have the desire or capability to build a full technology team. Or second, it can be a very large enterprise. We have resources, we have knowledge and skill sets. And so we want to build up some of that capability. But going back to the question, as far as what the tech stack should look like, and maybe some key components there, right? And so I think the fundamentals are key, right? And so what I'm alluding to is the platforms as a service. And so I think the cloud platforms, they provide a lot of capabilities, right? And so, of course, the big players are here are Azure. AWS, Google Cloud Platform, and the list goes on, right? And so there's other players here. Databricks, of course, is a very popular, capable solution within the AI space. And so I think it is looking at leveraging, exploiting some of those cloud services based upon your business, based upon your data security requirements to build some of those capabilities. In addition to that, so there's other tools and capabilities, particularly from the security, from the monitoring side. And so it's everything from looking at how data is going to be safeguarded and what are additional policies and procedures that we can put in place. There's other open source capabilities, right? Depending upon your use case, such as if we have a chatbot, what are memory requirements of that LLM chatbot? Thereby, LangChain is often a great solution. And there's competitors, right? Obviously, Google, they have their own competing solution. And then I would say also last year is that there's other capabilities that depending upon the requirements. And so some of these are legacy technology capabilities. And so let's say that we have a very common query for my restaurant recommendation example, right? And so people are going to be asking, where can I eat that I have a discount code within a mile to 2 mile of the hotel, right? It can be a common question. Thereby is that we may cache our responses, right? Because it's a frequent query. And so a solution for that, I think some of us may know, is Redis. So that's a common caching solution. And then there's others, right? Depending upon complexity, you could go on and on.
Yeah. Yeah. And really speaks to the governance piece in that, with all these tools and automation, if you don't have governance, you're looking at chaos at the end of the day. Right.
Yes, yes,
Or at the very best, a specialized, somebody who's specialized in each one of these tools that's
yeah,
helping kind of bring them in and manage them, which is not sustainable. Right.
yes, yes.
So in these kinds of environments, I mean, what risks worry you the most right now?
Well, I think a lot of risks. So for one, so risk is very tightly integrated with business process, how the solution will be consumed. So, in other words, right, that I highly recommend there should be an evaluation of the underlying business process and the automation that is being envisioned there. So, in other words, is that you can have a very risky process, such as financial reporting or regulatory reporting. And so that is another level of risk than perhaps the generation of restaurant recommendations or marketing content. So, given that each one of those has a different level of risk and a different level of concern. I think in addition to that, there are data risks in regards to that data is not going to be cleaned, it's going to be biased for training, it's not going to be transparent. There is another output and delivery risk that I think we all know is that we're primarily talking about probabilistic solutions, right? Either with Gen AI or machine learning, they're based on probability. Thereby, Gen AI has the possibility to hallucinate. It's going to give you a reasonable sounding output that is factually incorrect. So, that
Yep.
is a key risk of how to monitor and identify and have the proper human in the loop for those scenarios.
Makes sense. And I mean, how do these organizations now make AI explainable and more importantly, auditable according to these risks?
Yes. So, I would say, first off, that it often starts at the data. It starts at the source. Is it's proving and archiving what is the data lineage? Where is that data coming from? What is that quality of data? what is the pipeline to either cleanse or enrich or finalize that data is because internal audit regulators that they want to particularly pay attention to this, right? What data was used to train your solution, and is it cleansed data? Is it biased data? And so those are really clear mitigations, I think, to start with as far as looking at your overall capabilities.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, that's absolutely something we see constantly. I mean,
Yeah,
organizations are rushing into AI,
yeah,
but they're ignoring
yeah,
some of
yeah,
these fundamentals, right?
yeah,
Security, compliance,
yeah,
operational
yeah.
guardrails. So, absolutely.
Yeah, and if you want, or I should say, if you need, and I think there is a need that you need to explain your models, that you need to really deliver solutions that have explainability. And there are some use cases here that this is highly relevant for. And so I'm really pointing to medical use cases, medical diagnostics. And so those are particularly required highly explainable use cases, and then other use cases within very regulated environments, financial services, etc., is that make sure that you have that explainability, you have that bias detection, and so that you document it, you can archive it, and then you can explain it to your business leaders and stakeholders as well as audit or regulators and so on.
Yep. Yeah. No, that makes total sense. I mean, I know many in the industry have operated on the premise of complexity, providing margin. I don't know that we're headed in that direction. I think, auditability, simplicity, the ability to communicate what exactly is happening is becoming more important, not less
Yeah.
important. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and look, let's get ourselves out of this environment and look 5 years, 10 years out.
Yeah.
Seems like a lifetime now, away.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Um, what would an AI driven enterprise look like in 5 years, in your opinion?
Well, I would say that there is going to be some improvement of the delivery of overall value with automation. And so when I say automation, and that is including Gen AI, also machine learning for prediction, classification of data and outputs, and so on. And I think also, second, what really everyone within this area has been talking about for about the past 2 years now, which is agentic AI, right? And so now we are moving from solutions that are prompt and response with some additional planning and reasoning, but now with agentic AI, right? And so now we're going to be building solutions that interact with their environment, either technology or system wise, or just understand and use different types of data within their decision making and to take action, right? And so that's really the big part of agentic AI right now, is that we
Yeah.
can automate some workflows and really end-to-end streams with some human involvement and human in the loop.
Okay. And do you think, I mean, that human in the loop is going to be gone in 5 years? I mean, do you think there'll be bots and agents, managing workflows autonomously and completely?
Well, yeah, I would say maybe to a small degree, right? But I think by the context of Gen AI solutions is that going back to the earlier part of our discussion, there is often terms real risk there and huge risk. And even if you have a human in the loop with any sort of automation or AI process. That does not remove the value, is because you still have a machine or technology that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, right? They're ingesting thousands of pages of documents and they're taking some very specific manual actions. And so to have a human in the loop there to review exceptions or final output, you are still achieving a lot of value.
Yeah, agreed, fully agreed. And reducing the risk immensely, right? So automation
Yeah.
without human, I think, will provide more risk, not less risk. right?
Yes,
At the
yes,
cost potentially of gains.
yes.
And so in that world, I guess, and I know we all grapple with this, but what roles do you think humans will still play in decision making and the actual actions of a lot of these workflows?
Well, so I think in a few areas. And so, for one, that it's going to be the handling of exceptions or edge cases, right? Is because we're going to design solutions and some of that design is going to handle edge cases, right? But we're going to design solutions not for the exceptions. We're going to really design solutions that handle the bulk amount of data or request. And so it's going to be humans that are going to be handling those process exceptions. I think second that it's going to be humans reviewing the final output and recommended course of actions, right? So if we have a predictive model, even together with an LLM to plan a corporate event or a marketing campaign, is that we will still have the people with experience to review the reasonableness if there's any possible hallucinations in there. And so I think we will still have that high level review, even though that we'll have a machine synthesizing a lot of that data and information. And then based upon what it knows, it's going to be doing the planning and reasoning that is going to then pass it on for a human to finally decide.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think, yeah, hopefully, and I think it's elevating all of our ability to think more strategically.
Yes. Yes, certainly. And even with our business executives, right? There's so much information out there that our executives need to summarize, consume, use their own levels of experience and rules of thumb. And so now we're going to have these tools that can provide certain recommendations to leaders, business managers, and then it's us to decide of really the best course of action to move forward.
Yep. Yep. I love that. And looking at basically a lot of where to start today. Um, it is overwhelming. So let's take it back now and say, look,
Yeah.
you're starting out your career, Mark's just graduating. What would you learn first? What should these grads get into now?
Yes. So I would say for our newer people that are entering the workforce, and definitely there's lots of exciting things that are happening within AI, that I think it's important to understand even from a high level about what these particular solutions can do and what they cannot do. And so if you're looking at machine learning, well, that's almost a topic in itself. There is such a large amount of information there in comparison to Gen AI, and then there's going to be needs in both, right? And so for newer people, it's going to be a decision on where you want to operate on more the functional side of working with business leaders, stakeholders to define their problems and with that base level of understanding. I think for other people, if you do want to be more technical, that there is a realm of opportunities there. And certainly there's a lot to specialize in on the security side, which is taking a whole new different approach with Gen AI versus on actually the development side or technical design side. And then last, of course, there is support here, right? What do we need to monitor? What is our design of infrastructure for these different types of solutions? And so there's definitely a lot to learn there. The fundamentals matter. And then I would say it's up to the individual what appeals to them most for them to focus on going down the road and in the future.
Yep. Yeah. And I think like focusing on the overall and the architecture is more important than any particular tool, right?
Yep.
Pigeonholing
Yeah.
yourself
Yeah.
potentially
Yeah.
with the rate of innovation that we're seeing could be limiting.
Well, so I would say it's not necessarily the specific tool, and there's lots of great tools out there, right? And as I mentioned before, it's the platforms as a service, it's the cloud platforms that offer a lot of capabilities, and not just on the AI side, but then bundled with all their other networking and infrastructure services and so forth. But a lot of the core concepts are the same. And so if you're going to look to build a AWS ML solution versus a Azure versus an IBM, it's a lot of the core concepts. And so in my experience is that we've leveraged a lot of these tools with very foundational requirement and design applications. And then, furthermore, that we have applied some of the newer tools that are on the market, right? And so I'm referring to a lot of these additional capabilities and some of these additional software development kits, such as from Google. And so there was a recent paper that was published that has 21 different agentic AI patterns, which I think is great. And then it gave you the code to support and build each one of those. And so those are fantastic, right? And looking at some of these open source technologies like LangChain and certainly the Hugging Face community is really what we have leveraged to meet our specific and client needs with their own goals.
It's been a great conversation. I love it, Mark. Well, thank you for coming on. Just some closing remarks. Obviously, automation AI are often framed as, futuristic concepts, or you're implementing too early and kind of breaking things and faltering forward. But ultimately, the real challenge is making them work inside your organization, regardless of how complex or not it might be. So thank you so much. And thanks for
Yeah,
joining us on the Vault. Appreciate it,
absolutely.
Mark.
Yes, my
See you
pleasure.
soon.
Thank you so much.